the gentle, the extraordinary power of clarity. We have moved from the lymphatic capacity for taste to distinguish between what one likes and what one doesn't like, to the lymphatic capacity of intuition, which is manifested through our hearing and the physical vibration of our body and its vibration field. The 57th gate is the gate of the right ear. It is part of the right angle cross of penetration, the 57, 51, 53, 54. These are deeply penetrating forces. The first line, confusion. If you got line prejudice, you'll miss the beauty of this one. Venus exalted the gift of penetrating to the inner meaning that ensures timely action. This is the intuition at work spontaneously through the acoustic field. Now that does not mean that that's what you hear consciously. That we have a hearing capacity, an acoustic capacity that operates through our whole body. And that every one of the lymphatic cells in our body, which cover our entire body, are equipped for acoustical recognition. The lymphatic system makes decisions based on what is healthy for it or not. The depth of this clarity is to know in the now and to know clearly in the now. It is important to note that the mind cannot understand the lymphatic system. They do not speak the same language to each other. They really do not understand each other. And that the lymphatic system, the immune system, the splenic center, is the weakest center of all the centers. It is inherently weak. That's why it can only respond once. It can only tell us once. It's not because it's nasty and refuses to tell us anymore. It's because it does not have the strength to repeat that. And that when it speaks to us, it speaks to us with the urgency of life and death. Now, it does not mean if you do not pay attention to it, you will die, but it does mean if you consistently do not pay attention to it, you will suffer physically. The possibility of the intuition penetrating to the inner meaning in the now. Penetrating to the inner meaning doesn't mean you get to express it. It is a knowing, a gut feeling. But it is not action. Think about how difficult it is to be a splenic projector. When you're a splenic projector, you know in the now. But that does not mean that you can actualize out of that. It does not mean you can do anything about it. You meet somebody. You're sitting with them in a room. You know in the now that you are uncomfortable with them and should not be there. But you are a projector and there's nothing to do. If you don't panic, if you don't try to be what you're not, if you hold on to that recognition within yourself that you're in the wrong room, at some point, you'll be invited to leave. And then you can never come back, and that's okay. It does not mean because you can be aware in the moment that you can transform that awareness into activity. And because the splenic system is weak, You have to know that's the way it works, so when you do have that experience, that you don't forget it. Even if you're stuck in that room for an hour, you don't forget it. You wait till you can go. You just know that you'll never do that again. Everything about us is about living out our nature. Everything is about living out your definition and your type and your authority. After all these days, you're going to hear that ringing in your head, say, ringing in your head. Good logical teacher, I keep on repeating it to you. Make sure that you keep on hearing it. A necessary formula. The moon in detriment, where feelings are no substitute for clarity and can lead to indecision. That is the possibility that confusion will overpower the intuition. Anything can overpower intuition. Anything. And mostly the emotional system. You know, the emotional system makes blind. So the foundation here of clarity, the whole possibility of what it is to be clear, is to accept the knowing and have no expectation. The knowing is a mutation. Second line. Cleansing. The second line of the 57 doesn't know how clear it can be, because nobody has called upon its power of intuition. And when somebody does, of course, that's the moment that it opens up all of that. Splenic gates. The 48 and the 57 that are beside each other here in the wheel and beside each other here in the splenic center. These are the gates that open up the possibility of linking the spleen to the throat and its metamorphic capabilities. That is, connecting the splenic system to the thyroid system. These are the healthiest people on earth. That is, their thyroid operates in harmony with their splenic system without the need for bridges. So when you're looking at these gates, the recognition is that to have a solution or to have a knowing is fundamentally a healthy thing. It's fundamentally healthy. And it's very important to be able to get them out. The second line is the clarity to establish proper values and ideals that must be accompanied by the resolute determination to maintain them. The great dilemma of knowing. If you've got an intuition, you have to live it out. If you don't live it out, you're going to suffer the consequences. You know, sitting in the hospital with your leg up saying, I knew it, I just knew it. So typical of splenic people. They got the gut feeling and it was overridden. Venus exalted, perfected cleansing through inner realization. That is the possibility for proper values and ideals through intuition. Now these people have them on their own, in their own little room. And it's other people that are always calling them out. They're calling them out because they need that intuition. This 57 is in the integration channel. Think about what the integration channel sounds like without the 57. It says, I am, the 20, busy, the 34, for myself, the 10. But there's no 57. I do not know what I'm doing. I'm busy for myself, but I do not know what I'm doing. Instead of the 57 just being called by one gate, one harmonic gate, it's being called by all three. And the temptation of the 57 is to want to be all three. To want to be the archetype, to want to be the perfected form, to want to be the penetrating awareness. In the lower trigram, without the transpersonal skills, It's deeply self-absorbed, and this is a deeply self-absorbed gate and channel. The moon in detriment. A superficial cleansing that tends to hide the dirt underneath the carpet. By the way, these people do that. The possibility that the depth of the intuition will be treated superficially. It means something else. Because these people don't always get called out, their intuition doesn't always get called out. A lot of things go on around them in their lives that they knew were going to happen to their friends, to other people. It's a gift. It doesn't always come out. I mentioned to you as we move through the 64 hexagrams, and as we expose genetic continuity as it operates through the lines, we have seen an enormous similarity between all of the lines, that is, first lines with each other and so forth. But we've also seen in certain situations the structure is advantaged in a hexagram or disadvantaged in a certain hexagram. Here you have the third line in its most advantaged and special position. That is, you have the third line in the 57.3, and this is called acuteness. There is no detriment, Mercury exalted, the perfected intelligence where clarity eliminates doubt and ensures manifestation. The possibility of perfected intuition. Now we know that these people bang into others, but they're mutative bangers. And part of mutation is getting banged. And they bang into you. And they bang into you with their knowing. They're ready for manifestation, even though they don't know how it will come out in the now. But please understand something. The now is dying to know what's going on in the now. You know, it's so busy or busy with itself that it's just a relief. And without the knowing, there's no survival. And without the knowing, there's no archetype. You know, the knowing is like the prettiest girl at the county fair. You know, everybody wants to dance. So they get a chance to put their intuition directly into manifestation. The trial and error is how that's always coming out in the now. Not about the acuteness. The 2057. The 2057 is part of two different circuits. That is, it is part of integration, and at the same time it's part of the circuit of individuality. It is there inherently in terms of its gates. One of the things that I have taught you in human sexuality, in caring in human sexuality, is that the 57th gate operates differently in a design depending on whether there is a 2838 or not. If there is no 2838 in the design, they are totally self-absorbed with self-caring and are not interested in the other than in, you know, circumstances of accident, emergency, whatever. But the moment that there is the 2838, their knowing and their intuition is always open to consideration of the other. And this, of course, changes the integration into something that is much more humanistic and much more integrative. So when you get to the upper trigram here, and you get to this transpersonal quality, that transpersonal quality will operate in different ways depending on the design. They will be really transpersonal in empowerment if the 28 or the 38 is present. But if it's not present, they will only be transpersonal to get to the now. Nothing more and nothing less. In other words, who can manifest their knowing. And this is called the director. The mastery of relationships that through clarity can maximize productivity, while the sensitivity to interrelationships will ensure harmony. The possible intuitive clarity to master relationships. Remember that this is an externalizing gate. And what they really want to master, if there's no 2838, is that they want to master the relationship with those that manifest their knowing. They want to master 20s. And they'll settle for 34s. And they'll even settle for 10s. But of course the 34 generates and is energy and the 10 is not. So the energy is their preference. But they'll try to master those types in order to always be able to get access. And they will externalize to those types. Now, by the way, if you are a 57-4 and you're living out your design, you get those that will resonate to all that. Mars and detriment, a tendency given this position to be dictatorial rather than directorial. With such a gift, the possibility of being intuitively directorial. You have to be here now. Controlling the now, controlling their access to the manifestation or to the generation. And they're fixed in that. If the 2838 is present, then they tend to do that with the openness to empower others in that process. In other words, to empower others to be directors themselves. However, without it, they're simply the example of what that looks like. When you get to the last 7 minutes and 30 seconds of this line, fourth line, the design, Sun, Earth change their position, and the 5354 becomes the 6261. By the way, one of those things that you might want to notice is that in the changing cross of the first line and in the changing cross of the second line, in the foundation cross of the second line, that in the cross itself, the 54-4 is present. And it tells you something about this acuteness and where it comes from, that there's a deep mystical rooting behind that, the intuition guided by greater forces. The juxtaposition cross is the cross of intuition, and it's the 5751, 6261. The left angle cross is the left angle cross of the clarion. That is the 57, 51, 62, 61. This is the second version. And this fifth line is called progression. It says the natural ability to establish new forms while maintaining the powers of reevaluation and reexamination. This provides the clarity to examine the data and assess the process. This is a deeply mutative line. Deeply mutative. That is, it has the natural ability to bring mutation. And with the power not to be lost in the mutation, but the power intuitively to see where the mutation is leading. That is the possible intuitive gift for evaluation, and that is the evaluation of mutation and the right mutative moment. Remember the seduction of the general. Its ability to wait for that moment of crisis to bring its practical solution. The moment that that new form is there, it is the capacity to practically bring that new form and fit it in. Because it can evaluate the process. It can see what the mutation leads to and how it can fit into the rest, to the collective, to the tribe. And ultimately to be able to explain it in the now. I know. I am here now and I know. Not just that I'm busy with myself. The moon in detriment. The tendency to keep on keeping on that can end up as a misguided missile. I like that. It's where my earth is in this line, so this line is cute. This is about being endlessly mutative. You know, you're constantly changing form. Constantly changing form. Just endlessly mutative. I lived that out in a period of my life where I would wear 3 different sets of clothing in a day. And that went on for years. Just constantly being mutative. Meaningless. You know, the misguided haberdashery, or whatever you want to call it. When in action, the intuition may become overwhelmed and unable to assess and evaluate its progress. And then, of course, the mutation means nothing. It has no place. It has no value. You know, this is the freak syndrome. If you cannot explain it, it will not be accepted. Period. The 6th line. When you get to the roof of this house, think about what that's lying. You have a knowing in the moment, and that you're dependent on others to get it out. That you have this knowing in the moment, and you have to concentrate on when and who and the right timing and all of these things. You have an individual gate, and individual gates are all melancholic by nature. They are all melancholic by nature. Wherever you find an individual gate, you find melancholy in yourself. And there's so many individual gates. And melancholy is a chemistry. It is the chemistry of happiness and sadness. And it is a chemistry that deserves no reason. Melancholy is creative. It is the creative aspect of being an individual. It is the creative environment of individuality. And without sadness being accepted into the individual process, there is no creativity. There is only deterioration. Happiness. Happiness is a matter of chemistry. And for the individual, happiness is the time to be on the stage. It's time to be out in the world. It's time to be a stranger of consequence. So the nature of the 57th gate, like all individual gates, is that it goes through its melancholy with its knowing. It knows and it doesn't get to manifest. It knows that it does get to manifest. It'll be happy and sad with either, because it's chemistry. The 57 that does not have consistent access to the 20 is always going to feel melancholic about its knowing. And it will be the environment that drives it deeper and deeper into its creative process. The 57-6, the 6th line, is going to be involved in the 3rd line process. The 3rd line process here is exalted. Acuteness. The 57-6 really does know things. Does not mean that those things have been manifested consistently in its process, but it really does know in the now. And it gives up on sharing or empowering others with that knowing. And if there's no 28 or 38, it gives up sooner. I know. They don't know. I can't mutate them. And then it examines knowing. Uranus exalted. The acceptance that clarity is a double-edged sword. There are situations where understanding cannot lead to rectification. Here, Uranus' innovated quality can generally make the best out of an otherwise difficult and rarely permanent situation, where there is no answer. Only the possibilities of the intuition can make the best out of a difficult situation? The answer is in the manifestation. After all, it's not enough to know. The most depressing thing in the world for a knower is that it doesn't get to see the mutation happen. That it doesn't get to see that it has a chance to make the mutation happen. That it is ostracized. And that it ostracizes itself. The outsider. Mars and detriment. When clarity points to a problem, one is unable because of circumstances to solve a tendency to anger and frustration that provokes inevitably futile action. A tendency to frustration and anger when the intuition cannot solve a problem. You know, how do I get my knowing out? And there's nobody there that knows what I mean. Think about the 57 that doesn't have the 20th gate and doesn't have any kind of practice or any kind of consistent way of learning how to explain themselves. And that to explain themselves, they're always going to be conditioned by somebody else bringing that gate. And they may not accept or resonate to that knowing. It can be very, very frustrating. By the way, all of these gates of possibility are frustrating. You know, you're so close. You know, it's like, all I need is that one little thing and I'm there. And for the 57, it's even more frustrating because there's 3 little things that it could get to. Oh, if I could only over there and that one over there. Yeah. It's a joke. It's all a joke. You get to the end of the 57 process, you get to the end of this deeply mutative process, this knowing process. And where do you go? You don't go to the 34 or the 10 or the 20. You go for the money. You go to the 32. You go for the money. It's human.